Okay, as promised, we're going to spend some time reviewing solving systems of equations using matrices. So this is coming from a worksheet that you'll see posted with this video. I'm doing problem 1, 3, and 12, and I'm going to show you them step by step, kind of what we're going to do. So problem 1 here is the system of equations. First thing I'm going to do is write that as an augmented matrix, so you'll see that off to the right of the problem. Then I'm trying to get zeros in any of the rows. So I see very easily that if I can add row 1 and row 3 together, I can get some zeros in row 1. So that's going to be the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add row 1 and row 3 together. Okay, so if you want to go ahead and try that on your own, this is what you should get when you add those together. And I just said that I'm going to set that equal to row 3. Okay. Main reason why, if I were to add those together and rewrite that as row 1, then I'm not getting the ones in the diagonals like I want. Okay, so remember that I want to get ones, and let me just highlight this for you. I want these three numbers to be ones, then everything else to the left-hand side of that vertical line I want to be 0. So if I were to replace this addition problem here with row 1, I would end up with a 0 in that very first box, and that's not what I want. So I need to replace it with row 3. When I do that, I see that I can easily divide or multiply by a fraction in order to get that very last row what I want it to be. So I'm going to multiply row 3 by 1/6 and negative 1/6. And that will give me the one that I want in that diagonal. Okay, then I'm going to see if I can get some other zeros anywhere. So the first thing that I've noticed is if I do 4 times row 1 and add that to row 2, I can get that 0 in the first place in row 2. So I'm going to do that process. Okay, and that's what I get when I do that combination. Next thing that I want to do is see if I can get rid of the 16 in that row 2. So I'm going to do 16 times row 3 and add that to row 2. So I have a negative 25, 75. In order to get that negative 25, because again, remember that I want to get, looking at this new matrix, I want to get these three values to be a positive 1. Oops. So for row 2, everything is good except that negative 25. So I'm going to multiply row 2 by negative 1 over 25, and that will allow me to get that positive 1 that I'm looking for. And now all I need to do is figure out ways to get the 2 negative 5s in my first row to become zeros. So I do 5 times row 3, add that to row 1. That gives me 1 0. Then I need to do the other negative 5. 5 times row 2 and add that to row 1 to replace row 1. And now I have a negative 1, so the only thing I need to do is multiply all of row 1 by a negative 1. And there you have your final matrix. So then for this solution, you should have gotten a value of negative 2, negative 3, 3. And you will see that answer in blue on your answer key. You just won't see all the steps in purple. Okay, you could have approached this many different ways. I just approached it the way that I did. I was trying to cancel out as many as I could in the very first step, and that just allowed me to work from row 3 and work my way up to row 1 until I got it in that reduced row echelon form. Okay, that reduced row echelon form gives us zeros everywhere else except that diagonal. All right, so the next problem that I'm trying is problem number 3. This should be problem 3 on your worksheet as well. I'm going to write it in that matrix form of negative 1, negative 5, 1. Okay, then that vertical line is just showing what it equals. So again, a couple different ways that you can do in order to cancel these out. The first step that I'm going to do, so I'm going to actually do kind of 2 steps in one. So for my second matrix, you'll see that I'm adding row 1 and row 3 together from my original, the one there in purple. And then I'm also taking all of row 2 and dividing it by 5, or multiplying by 1/5. You could keep row 2 as the -5 5s, but I like to see if I can get everything canceled out back to 1s because it's just easier for me to see what I need to do moving forward to get it into that reduced row echelon form. So that's a new matrix when I do both of those steps. I replaced row 1 and row 2 by those two different combinations. And I'm going to work from there. I'm going to do -2 times row 1 and add that to row 3 in order to hopefully get rid of that -2 in that last column. Sorry, I'm replacing it with row 3. So I'm getting rid of the 2 in the first column for row 3. That gives me a 0. I'm going to keep working through, see what else I can do. I decide row 1 and row 2 I'm going to add together. Okay, and look, that gives me a 0 in row 2. So now I'm just going to kind of work with my zeros and see if I can get them to be in the places that I need them to be. So I'm adding row 2 and row 3 together and replacing that with row 2. Okay, when I add those together, your goal is always to try to get zeros when you're adding or replacing rows like that. So when I add these two together, that what's in the blue box is going to become 0 for row 2. Okay, now notice that row 2 I have a 4 and a -16. I have the numbers in the right spot, but I still need to get them to be a 1. So I'm going to do a little bit of dividing the next step, or multiplying by a fraction. So I have the 1/4, and now that will allow me to get row 2 with the exact value that I want. Once you get a 1 in the right spot and zeros in the correct spots as well for that row, you don't want to do anything else with replacing that row. So when you go and add and subtract rows in order to get this into reduced row echelon form, that's fine. Just make sure that you're not replacing it with row 2. Row 2 needs to stay as is for the remainder of the steps that we're doing. So next thing I'm going to do is -5 times row 2 and add that to row 3. Okay, and again, that's going to give me 0 in row 3. So now if you see this matrix, I have 2 rows exactly what I want. So now whatever steps I need to do, I need to be replacing row 1. Nothing with replacing row 2 or row 3. Okay, and so my final step was 2 times row 3, add that to row 1, and now everything is in the correct order that I need. So my solution would be a -1, -4, -4. Remember that this represents x, y, and z. Okay, I know that these matrix systems of equations have a lot of steps with them. Okay, and you can approach them many different ways. You just have to keep working through them, not give up. If you're taking maybe more steps than I am on the video, it might just be a different way that you approached it. Okay, keep working on it, but also make sure that you're double checking when you multiply values together and you're adding them together, because sometimes you can mix up the negative signs or make a mistake with your adding as well. So the last problem that I'm going to do is problem 12. Okay, this will be on your worksheet as well. Notice that some of the problems I picked a few towards the beginning. Typically those are a little bit easier, and then as you get towards the end of the worksheet, they become a little bit more difficult. So we are going to do problem 12. What I would like you to do, if you're feeling pretty confident, is go ahead and pause this video here, see if you can work it all the way out, and see if your solution matches up with what I have. The next slide that I'm going to show you is going to show you all the steps. Okay, so I'm not going to walk you through step by step with them. I'm just going to show you the entire outline for the steps. So go ahead and pause this right now. Try it on your own. See if you can match up with the solution. Your steps might be different than what I have, but your solution should still match up. So hopefully you paused it, and now you can check and see if you got the solution. You should have had -1, 6, and 1 is your solution. Remember, that's x, y, and z. Actually, in this case, it would not be x, y, z. It would be r, s, t. Okay, we go in alphabetical order for these solutions. Okay, so there are all my steps. I also show you what rows I'm adding or subtracting together and what it's going to replace from each matrix to the next matrix. Okay, I have a lot of work here as well. So on your papers, when you guys are solving these, you will probably have a decent bit of work as well. For this week, you guys will get a worksheet review of systems of equations. I want you to try to solve them using the matrix form that we did here. Now you don't need to solve all of them. There are a few that I canceled out on your worksheet, but pick a few and solve them. Pick one towards the beginning of the worksheet, maybe one towards the end, just to make sure that you understand the difficulty with these as well. The other thing this week is we've actually finished up our unit. So what I'm going to have you guys do is a portfolio. Okay, it's just a brief overview of kind of what you know and what you can summarize based on the content that we've practiced. So you can read all this. I'll post this on Google Classroom as well, but you'll see the topics there. I just want you to write maybe a paragraph. For some people who like to have a lot of details, it might be 2 paragraphs, but I really don't want you to go much further than 2 paragraphs. Just quickly explain in your own words how you solve or what steps you need to do in order to solve these types of topics. You might have to include some vocab, like notice for that last topic we have row echelon form and reduced row echelon form. So you might need to go back into your notes or rewatch some of the videos to remember what the vocab means. But just clearly give an overview of what you think the topic is, how you solve it, what steps you need to do. And then also provide 1 or 2 examples that show your explanation. Okay, so I want your explanation in words, and then I also want your explanation with a math problem. And it can be an example that we've done with your homework. That's fine. If it's an example you felt pretty good with and you were confident, pick one from your homework. You don't need to make up a completely new example. Okay, there will not be another video on Wednesday, but I will be providing with this video and towards the beginning of the week for those who want to get a head start on this. I'll be providing kind of like a quiz review problem set that we would do in class if we were having a quiz, and I'll give you the answer keys for that as well. Now this quiz review, you're not having a quiz, you're doing this portfolio to give me an overview, but the quiz review will have problems from everything that we've covered, solving systems of equations, adding, subtracting matrices, multiplying matrices, and then using matrices to solve systems as well. Okay, so you can go through those problems. If you feel confident with stuff that we did in the beginning of this unit, then maybe only do 1 or 2 practice problems and skip to some of the other ones that you might need a little bit more practice on. We won't have any formal Google Hangout session times, but if you do have questions, feel free to email me and we can set up a Google Hangout time if we need to as well. Okay. Also email me with any questions for the portfolio. It's just a quick overview. Okay. So I don't want you to get too freaked out. You're not writing like a 10-page paper or anything like that. Just maybe a paragraph on each of these topics and an example problem. Okay. You can try to type that in a Google form if you want. You might have to take like a picture of your work for the example problem and upload that to a Google form or Google document. That's fine as well. And then you can just share it with me, or you can just take pictures if you want to handwrite it in a notebook and just share those pictures with me. Okay? Hope you guys have a great week. Let me know if you have any questions. Next week, we'll actually get started with some calculus topics. Okay? So make sure that you're focused on this unit for right now and you're doing your best with the portfolio and kind of quickly summarizing in your own words what we've covered so far. Have a great week.